and this sort of relevant to what I have in mind for this conversation, a little bit relevant anyway, because it's to do with expanding out from the, well, I can perhaps hesitantly call it the narrow confines of work groups and fourth way ideas and so on into a broader canvas, you know, because I've become more and more aware, and it's, to be sure, becoming aware, it's a very slow business as far as I'm concerned, extremely slow business. And then I can really doubt where I've got to and made any advance. You know? In a sense, how parochial the fourth way ideas are. And on the one, and I propose this as a possible idea. This is how it seems to me. That is all within a certain range of assumptions and vocabulary, like many other systems or movements. And there's so many other vantage points which could impinge on it, where people are unconnected with Gurdjieff at all, or the fourth way, or anything like this. And
yeah,
this is, but the parochialism is something I want to emphasize on this, because you don't really, well, Mr. Bennett in his expositions, as I told you, been working on republishing Deeper Man, so I've gone through his stuff very deeply. I do see what he doesn't really start from people as they are, so to speak, in the actual ordinary world of people at all. He certainly comes here with this enormous apparatus of ideas, his perspectives. Then he starts trying to explain them, but he never, ever gets to a point of saying, well, let's just start from the basics, you know, whatever the basics are. There's you, there's me, there's this going on. And can we see anything about these? I'll pause in a minute because I want to get your reactions to this and reflections, and it's very important. I don't just go on, but because that's the substance of this conversation, I feel. You have these very special vocabularies and languages for describing human experience and the nature of reality and so on. But these come, one might say, almost prefabricated, and they're not built up as, say, philosophers or scientists or writers might try to do, you know, in the 20th century. That is to say, you know, you can know these great philosophers, Heidegger or Whitehead, and who work so hard trying to get this expression of things. But on the one hand, with somebody like Mr. Bennett, who, you know, I admire so much, he comes with this kind of almost ready-made system, but he helped, you know, to refine it and develop it and all the rest of it. But it doesn't, well, how can I say it? The only thing I can bring in before I hand over to you, just to come over our reactions to exploring things, is to quote that hackneyed Irish joke.
Oh, yeah.
You know, of the American in Ireland. You know the story.
Yeah.
Saying, could you tell me the way to Killarney? And the uncle said, well, if it's starting to Killarney, I wouldn't start from here. You see, there's the question of where we're starting from, what we're believing in to start from, what we accept as true, where does this derive? And so these are multiple of hardly formulated questions, and I'll just quieten down, you say something.
Okay, well, just in like in my own discussions, you know, say in my own attempts to talk about the work with other people, like, you know, these conversations are 90% with people who are familiar with it, you know, they're not people who are not unfamiliar. But you know, just so then in my own pieces of writing and conversation, you know, I often find that there is a desire to the feeling would be then to like just sweep all that away, you know, get rid of everything, all the acquired, you know,
Oh,
ideas
really?
and association and the languages, and try to, like you'd say, begin it. Can we begin afresh now? You know, use some kind of language that isn't, you know, that doesn't have all those pre-acquired associations. You know, like, you know, I don't know, then the Kesjan body or the centers, or you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean.
There is, yes, there's a desire to be. I wish, in one sense, I could sweep that away and just, yeah, kind of use a language that was based more, say, than in the present moment, just talking from our experience here and now. So that kind of resonates with what you're saying about, you know, Bennett in Deeper Man. Then, not, you know, he's talking from that position, like you say, of all this massive acquired knowledge and experiences and language. And maybe not speaking to people, so to speak, directly as, you know, as they are now. So I'd always find that how you know, the ideas there, even when talking to work people, that how would you be able to talk about these kind of ideas to someone who was completely unfamiliar, you know, with any of those ideas or terms, you know? So that's part of a desire that I have in my own self. That I would, you know, how would you go about that? I mean, you know, we can use our direct experience. You know, we could talk about, yeah, just try to look at the elements of our experience in the moment as they are, and try to come to some common understanding. But so there's that side of me that wants to do that, do away with, you know, all the acquired ideas and stuff. But there's another side of me that says that obviously there's a value to them, and kind of as I am, I don't know if I'd have the ableness to do that. You know, it seems that in order to have a conversation, we have to have some kind of already, you know, pre-acquired common terms, you know?
Well, indeed. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree in what you were saying about the parochialism of the work as well. Yeah, in most of my conversations with people who are involved in it, there does seem to be that view that a lot of them just purely stick to the literature, you know, the canon material, and they don't range much outside of it. You know, anything outside of that is kind of almost looked down upon, you know, as as having a lesser degree of reality or worth or value than the, you know, the writings of Gurdjieff and you know, and his pupils. So, like you're saying, that people are probably cutting themselves off from a lot of them valid material that would help reinforce maybe their understanding of the work, you know.
Or going better this might also challenge the the standard work ideas, because it's astonishing. I mean, we take the example of what you were saying about this rejection. I know in the realm of psychology, I've been so keenly aware of rejection by a lot of people in the work of the findings of 20th century psychologists and who worked with groups and so on. And I have this consistent criticism going on that they don't appreciate what's been done on group process. And they run groups and so on in ways which are really ignorant. They haven't taken advantage of this work. And as an example of somebody trying to get rid of that, you know, Dr. Russell Schreiber has written about Gurdjieff's transformational psychology, but also he's a therapist, advocating drawing on what could be called standard psychology to enable us to make sense of the Gurdjieff psychology. It's that side of it.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, I mean, it doesn't make sense not to use it. I mean, unless obviously they're under the impression that things are working, you know, that the models that they're using are working. Then if they're under that assumption, then yeah, why would you feel the need to range outside of that? But yeah, I totally agree that. I mean, I don't have much experience in terms of like, you know, foundation groups and things like that. I've had a little experience with it, but yeah, it does seem that there would be the tendency towards, all the negative, all the negative things that, like you say, we know through group psychology and stuff, all the identification and all that kind of thing, and the abuses of power and cults and blah blah blah.
Indeed.
All that can come through that. But yeah, I don't understand that that kind of viewpoint, because to my own understanding, and how I see Gurdjieff, then it's more of an inclusive thing. Like the idea that anything could serve, that you could use, that you could use anything. Anything could work, and you could use anything towards your aim or to help understanding, and that you don't need to kind of reject, in one sense, anything.
Yes, I agree with very much my my attitude. You went on to say, well, the proper spirit of the work is to be able to learn. It's precisely to say, from anyone and from anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be labeled, Mr. Gurdjieff's ideas to be accepted. It could, because if you can learn, you can learn.
Yeah. Well, that's like that Sufi thing, isn't it? Learning how to learn.
Yeah.
So I mean, that seems like, to me, part of his, I say his, but part of that, the fourth way, seems to be almost like the way of no way. There seems to be very little established, established forms within the way. People, when they say, that Gurdjieff did this or did that, like they seem to have some idea that there was a set way of doing it. You see what I mean? Whereas to me, again, again, I'm not a scholar of all the work, so I haven't read everything, but it seems to me it was much more kind of fluid and dynamic. And there wasn't, there was movements and there was certain repeated elements and toasts and things like that, but it seems very, very loose. Whereas people seem to just hold on to those set elements and just repeat them and call that the work.
Well, that's indeed how I've felt about things. In my background, used to be into this, I don't know, in the phrase, same old, same old. This routine, morning exercise, practical work, movements, zikr, whatever it was. It's just formulaic, it comes out. And you see, part of it is just giving people something to occupy their time.
Well, yeah, you've got to do something, haven't you, I suppose?
Yeah, you've actually got to do something. And it was always routinized in that way. Yeah. So you draw upon a canon of work, because you've got a set of movements, you've got the set of morning exercises and so on. But so this is part of it, the how-to of it. What are the fundamental methods? This is something, which Bennett was certainly brave enough to explore many times. And he, as you may know, he did, when he was at Sherborne, produced his scheme of the 7 lines of work.
Yeah. Because
he was always searching, and it doesn't look like the ordinary view of methods at all. It's very much broadly based. And I always loved his idea that if you don't remember the scheme, but he has the kind of middle way, we call it the way of manifestation. And he kept on insisting, you don't have to be in the work or know about the work ideas to do this. What you have to do is what, for him, a burning reality. That is, it's the perfection of doing. It doesn't matter what you're doing, it's the perfection of doing. And suddenly this whole world opens up, because of that.
Yeah, I can't remember where it's from, but it just comes to mind. There was, I think he was talking about one of the saints, like Teresa, or one of them. And he's saying, like what she was talking about was like this perfection of good doing. I think he mentioned, I think in that quote he used the term like a quality or a value. So like the perfection of a quality or a value, whereby a duty becomes an interior act.
Oh, I didn't know that reference.
I think it's in the maybe the image of like God in the work, the image of God in the work.
Okay, it's in there.
Something like that. But I thought that was great. Usually like what's my kind of normal working conception of duty? But it has, to me, this kind of external thing that, yeah, I may realize, oh, I should do this, or it's my duty to do that. But the duty itself is always pictured as kind of something outside of yourself, whereas like the actual...
I got it. Yeah, I got it.
Of a duty. Yeah, yeah.
Indeed. If you...
Something like that, a perfection of doing, you know?
Yes, for him it was very specifically doing, and it has this term manifestation, and it was, I think it was a very central understanding for him, because he was always aware of and propagating the viewpoint that there's something in this fourth way, not exclusively, but something in this fourth way, which isn't like most people take spirituality. They're sitting in a room with incense and meditating. Yeah, it's, you know, it's in the middle of our, you know, it's actually, I make this gesture out my hands. When you're manifesting in the world, you're there on the spot. You know, we felt that's where it counted, and they're in front of a challenge and all these sorts of things. And it's not in the state of withdrawal and peacefulness. And incidentally, I'll throw in one of my habits of thought about this. I always criticize people when they talk about going on a retreat. And I say, why are you retreating? Why aren't you going on an advance? And I say, but I say, the word, you see, might be a triviality, a joke. But if you keep on saying you're going on a retreat, you see it has an effect. You're withdrawing. And this leads to such things as I've made mockery of sometimes in this, and say people valuing sitting in silence with each other rather than talking together. And I think, well, why? Because I think, but even Mr. Bennett was guilty of this, the same we sit together in silence, we're closer together than if we talk. In a way, that's absolutely true. In a way, it's absolutely not true, because in talking, you take the risk.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I definitely feel that, yeah.
You know, don't you? You say the wrong things, you don't understand each other, you can't find the words, all this stuff. But that's reality, you see. Yeah. That's what people want to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, there seems something more natural in that anyway. I mean, though in one sense it does kind of feel, I don't know, you could say forced, or I don't know, artificial maybe. You know, there can be like sense of awkwardness, like, you know, okay, I'm gonna have to try and express what I mean here, and we're gonna have to try and go through some kind of, you know, some effort and rigmarole. So you can see that there could be a kind of, you know, a resistance to doing that.
Certainly a resistance. It's because reality is hard. Yes.
Yeah, but so it seems, in one sense, it can seem artificial. You know, there can be that natural leaning towards just being, you know, in silence together. But on the other hand, there seems to be something about like this, what we're doing then, talking, you know, conversation, that seems more really natural, you know, to man, to humans. I mean, we can speak. So you know, if this gift, if we call it a gift, then maybe it's a curse, whatever. If this is gift,
there you go. It could be a curse.
If it's given to us, then it's probably, why don't we use it? You know.
Indeed, also mindful of Mr. Bennett's hero, who said, actually, it was very extraordinary, and I always regret never pressing him on this. And he said, I can see him now talking to me. He said about Ubayd al-Akhra, who lived in the 17th century, was his teacher, a man who died hundreds of years ago. But one of the things Ubayd al-Akhra said in the conversation was about this being in silence. He said most what people call being in silence, he found abhorrent. It's actually, you know, almost blasphemous, a really radical mistake. He said there are two kinds of silence, and of course he went on about the what would be the true kind of silence and so on. But that's, so this is interesting. See, there is the way in which we're touching on, say, Mr. Bennett's example, who did move in this direction, I say, which he said was actually characteristic of the fourth way, but also what he called a Middle Eastern traditions which he associated with, kinds of Sufism and so on, which are concerned with practical action. And with this lovely term, I've been reading in deeper matter, marifat. A marifat is like practical wisdom.
Yeah.
And it's to say, well, you may know what to do, but you don't know how to do it. But how to do it is you pick it up. And there's the touch of that I've picked up from science and so on. I was being struck, when the laser was first invented, and papers were published about, what a laser is. And then people tried to build them, and they said it didn't work, and they had to phone the guy up and talk to him personally, because there was always something involved about getting it to work, which wasn't in the scientific paper. They were saying to say it was a theory, so to speak. To make it work, you had to know the tricks of the trade.
Yeah, there's something more that couldn't be encapsulated in the text. Yeah,
in the formalism of the scientific paper, and say, well, it becomes something strange. And I go to detail now because I get my associations, and so one of my prime illustrative and helpfully stories was about blacksmiths in the 19th century. They had the practice of quenching steel, you have it up and you quench it. And they had apprentices, and there's still an aura about blacksmiths from ancient times, and it's very interesting going back into ancient times, how the blacksmith figure, and you see him with names for all places like Wayland Smith and so on, the smithy, was actually a reference to them as possessors of special knowledge, and even a code for them being astronomers.
Right.
So Hephaestus, who was married to Venus, was one of these. And so there's all stories. You see, I'm getting off and being distracted again. Yeah. Then about the blacksmith. So this thing, there's always mystique about the blacksmith, and the apprentice always has this stuff. How does, what's the real know-how about quenching the steel? And what tended to happen with the blacksmiths who project an idea or evoke an idea and say, well, you have to know what is the formula for the liquid in which the implement is being quenched. And some of them had all kinds of things, including, pissing in the liquid. See, but this is all a distraction, because the important thing, I pipped the post or whatever it is, the important thing was, what actually matters was not the liquid you put it into, but the temperature of the steel when you put it in. And that you register by sight because of the color. So all this stuff about the liquid was totally irrelevant, you see. Yeah. It was something else. But you have to know this. You have to.
Yeah. Well, I remember, it's a similar thing. I remember, I think it was on a program, again, about blacksmith, about the early kind of Chinese, development of metallurgy, because they're considered as one of the earliest, so far as I know, the earliest evidence development of metallurgy. But yeah, you can imagine that, I don't know, maybe if you go even further back, if there's a limitation, you could say in the nature of the language, so that's one limitation in how you can convey stuff, then, you're limited in what you can do. So you can imagine that as a pupil, I'm maybe just I'm just watching everything he does, and my kind of my apprenticeship then consists in being able to imitate what every action that he does. So in order to achieve the same result, so I can possibly achieve the same result just by mirroring his actions and not really knowing why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so there can be a lot of mystique and explanations about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if I just follow follow his actions, I can, there's the likelihood that I can achieve the same result. But as you could say, with my perception and stuff, there's always the possibility of things to be missed. So if I'm just working according to the kind of imitation, imitating him, then I might make the blade and it just shatters, and I don't know why, I don't understand why, why it's not working, Whereas what you're saying, that might be needed at one level, just to watch what he's doing and follow it. And there might be some necessary needed explanations of that. But all that might just be a kind of a side action to enable the kind of recognition that you're talking about, you know.
I think that's right. I was just thinking, I won't quote some of many Sufi stories about this, and also stories from the martial arts. And I always loved and you see, I can't resist it again. I have my mechanisms. You know, this story Charles Tart told me. I don't know if you know about him. He did write some various books about the work.
Yeah, bits of his stuff. Yeah.
And he said he was aware he was an intellectual and so on, and then he took up Aikido.
All right.
Had Japanese master, and he said it came to the point where it was like his master, he said, could do it, but he couldn't explain it. But he could explain it, but he couldn't do it. This kind of thing. And I had a friend who was actually helped introduce Aikido into England, and he said it's very interesting how these masters are so and completely unaware of what they were doing. Like masters would sort of teach, how to do move and so on, but it wasn't what he himself did. He didn't know there was this dissonance between what he was saying and what he was doing. There were two different worlds in this kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Even the person doesn't know, because we don't know what really matters, and this is an extraordinary area. It could be what it probably is going to be the things which are not noticed, which matter more than the gross behavior. Now, this is very interesting, the story about, the actual, what is the action? Because this is what is invoking in me, Josh, I say, what is the action, the work? Because referring again to Mr. Bennett, who was in this conversation, I believe, time to time criticizing him as well as admiring him. But at Aberration's side, he was poignantly aware of the work really as something I would dare to say was supernatural. Mm-hmm. He really wanted to go beyond the idea, by making efforts. That was the work, sweating.
Yeah.
And when I was with him, we used to talk about, we have these phrases and one of them to do with the reality of what was going on. They said, he talked about honest donkey. People could be doing something, it wasn't really transformative, but at least they were, doing it, whatever it was, diligently.
Yeah.
To be honest donkey, but it's sort of thing, honest donkey never gets anywhere, kind of thing. It's something else, which is to do with, and he turned everything round. I mean, he was, in one way, that's, you could say, it was why he became, in some people's eyes, a heretic. Because his whole thing towards the end of his life was, this, and it reflected what he had gone through and the changes in him, was that from the early days up to the 50s, he was known as Mr. Effort, and is quite ruthless,
Yeah.
And the story is, which was in Idiots in Paris, about Mr. Gurdjieff, who was pleading with Bennett not to work so hard.
I know, yeah. It must be something when he's telling you, well, calm it down.
Calm it down.
Yeah.
Bennett had kind of understanding, because he always claimed in some of his writings that Gurdjieff hadn't really understood the Western psyche, and so he's treating his Western students like he would Asiatics, and the implication was in the story, the Asiatics are lazy buggers, and he has got to trick them into actually making efforts.
Yeah.
But it was the notion there was something, and he literally called it, supernatural energies which work, and they're the work, you see, and we have to connect with them. So it's all turned around. What does this mean? So connection with them. But it's quite a radical shift in things. And if you do that, then it means, and a great opening up, as you started expressing, I said it may come from anywhere, and putting it into a regimented package is going to sooner or later make us miss the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, when you say, you know, when you were mentioning about, you know, him saying that, you know, the work is kind of, let's say, then really supernatural, and that is the work, you know, the action, and that's that's kind of like a, you know, a separate thing to the exercises and the making of the efforts, you know. So just in hearing that, you know, I mean, it's not the first time I've heard it, but, you know, part of me is like, woohoo, you know, you know, like, don't want to be rude, but it's like, you know, thank F that that it's not just that it's not just down to you know,
doing more movements or sitting on your ass for hours.
But I mean, I have a lazy mentality anyway. You know, maybe I have the Eastern mentality, so that's kind of like, oh, phew, you know, at least I'm not. It's not going to be down to that kind of action. Do you know what I mean? A matter of just you know, just steaming ahead on the same line, you know, and just hoping that via an intensity of commitment that it's gonna, you know, or an intensity of effort that you're gonna make it. So, you know, there's kind of like a release on that. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, oh crap, what if it's not these exercises and that's all my, you know, that's what I know, so to speak, that's what I've been brought up in, you know, then it's like, well, what is it? What is the nature?
That's right. That's right. You really, it's what's it all about then?
What's it all about then? But I love that. I mean, like you say, it opens up a whole new a new world to it, what that can involve. But I guess, I mean, again, the word supernatural kind of has a lot of you know, a lot of baggage with it, doesn't it, these days? Into, you know, when people speak of supernatural,
They simply mean something psychic, as they call it, as usually, or they.
Yeah, or like paranormal or something, isn't it? You know, that's what I would kind of, I think, if you said supernatural to most people, then kind of thinking, you know, ghosts.
Yeah, only ghosts and ghosts are, you know, in a sense, trivia. So you're quite right to raise this up. It's a very issue, a very keen nose do I can to make people aware. I mean, Bennett, you see, he made this distinction between the realm of the paranormal, as they call it, and we'll come back to that later. You know, it's belonging just to the second world, the astral world, the spirit world, and it's quite different from the spiritual world. Yeah. And it's a lot of very deep concerns with culture and religion and so on in here, because in a way the true monotheistic religions are really based in the spiritual world and not the spirit world. But most of the followers of so-called spirituality in the modern world are just in the spirit world.
Or trying to deal with that, yeah.
Well, trying to do, but at least they do, because there's no way you can evoke experiences in that second world quite easy, but it's quite different from the spiritual world. And the spiritual world is more intimately connected with the will, and see, what the spirit world is more open to, say, in the meditations and the, well, to put it too crudely in a way, in a sense, the dream world, you know, that kind of.
To my mind, that like the second, you know, if we call it the second world, then it almost seems like a kind of almost intensification of subjectivity. So you could say that a person, in one sense, entering into that sort of realm and those things, you could say that they're in, I don't want to say a worse position, but maybe subject to more risk than if they were just in the physical, or if they were, sort of speak, just in the spiritual. You know what I mean? It seems
absolutely more... I think that's true, but you know, everywhere there's risk and you get into trouble. But yeah, well, certainly in kind of enhanced subjectivity, there was this saying, you know, from religions or Christianity, always test the spirits, you know, don't get caught up with them. And also an element which is would be fairly unpopular these days, about being, how to say, detached about experiences. Because these people are running around having experiences, and for the classical mystic, this is childish, absolutely childish. So you had a bliss, okay, so are you a better person?
Yeah.
The kind of thing. Yeah. But this is what people say, oh, you must have it from your experience, you see. But even you talked about, being our conversation, you talked about direct experience. Now here is a major issue, because most of us, say us, trying to qualify it, believe we have direct experience. You see, like this old thing, you say, oh, how do you know about consciousness? Well, I'm directly aware of it here and now. But there's actually something in the work, and in Bennett specifically, which says, oh no, your idea of direct experience is a belief.
Yeah.
Is always in some way a construct. So
Yes.
you're leaping on, oh, this is my direct experience, is usually a sign that you caught up, just as you were saying earlier, in this second world. It's into you have a construct which often is very charged with emotion, but it's not direct.
Yeah, you're already, you're already operating from, like you say, the Kalani position, aren't you? You're already operating
Kalani position.
Yeah, you're already operating through a form. Well, I just call it that, of interpretation. And because we're so used to that, we take it for granted and call that form direct experience. Yeah.
Indeed.
So what I call in my direct experience is like, it's like second, third hand. It's not direct. It's the result of going through all these machinations and kind of like screening through through that form.
Absolutely. And you see, here's a much more subtle aspect of all this stuff about waking up, which has other reverberations. One I just mentioned is, escaping one's conditioning, because all the time it's going this conditioning. So we can talk about waking up as escaping conditioning. Well, it's usually just relative. And again, and how to get out of this, you see. And it becomes, for me, part of the reasons why the ideas of the fourth way are not popular. Because people believe, it's the old Gurdjieff thing, people believe they are conscious. Gurdjieff and Bennett come along and say, oh, no, you're not. So most people are going to say, who are you talking to? Fuck off,
Yeah.
Aren't they? And I keep on saying, I'm talking to you now. I'm completely convinced I'm conscious. And just in my brain, I say, well, and these clever guys said, you should doubt this. And I think, I don't know, it's very hard. It's just, what do you mean? What could be more real than this?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, if that's kind of like, the first sort of idea or tenet that a person comes across of the work, and that seems like, the most ridiculous thing they've ever heard, then they maybe not, they're probably not likely to engage with it. Or they maybe just think that, that what those, Gurdjieff or Bennett, what the guys are referring to by consciousness is just some kind of specialized terminology for just a slightly exaggerated or heightened state of consciousness. We all experience moments of
oh, that's right,
a bit more vivid and stuff. So maybe think, oh, well, that's what they mean by consciousness, is just being a bit more aware, a bit more vivid stuff, sense impressions, everything just being a bit more here, and they call that consciousness. So I think that's what a lot.
That's well put. This is like major thing. Excuse me.
But yeah, a lot of people seem to get stuck in that calling that consciousness, just a slight kind of intensification of your normal experience, and that's why I was kind of meaning that that there can be this kind of almost like, I don't know, I'd have to use the word mechanical approach to the work, and it goes back to that idea of like effort, isn't it? Like if I have a kind of a mechanistic sort of view of what the work is, then that's good. That idea conditions my approach to it. If I have a mechanistic view that I do these practices, and then I get this result, but so that idea of a kind of the work as something mechanistic can, from my perspective anyway, limit our practice and our understanding. But I can see to an extent where that comes from, because like with the ideas of the food factory and all this, it kind of presents, development as something mechanical, like you do this, you make this conscious shock here, you make this conscious shock here.
It's got an algorithm.
Yeah. And so I think that if people take the work that way, then that kind of feeds into that approach of just by effort and just by repeating, that same form or practices. I mean, that just seems crazy to me. I mean, again, maybe that's just because of my lazy mentality, but it seems crazy to me that someone would just perpetuate, like, I do my morning exercise, I'll do my movements, and just carry on when they're not experiencing anything maybe different from that,
Well, we raised, two sides to this. They're not experiencing anything, but also when they are experiencing something different, there is this question remains. They get a high, so to speak.
Yeah, true.
And because bring in some other associations here, just remembering my old friend Simon Waitman, who he was at the University of London and head of religious studies, and he did a series of lectures on mysticism based on Bennett's energies. And it's very interesting, his treatment about this, because something about these energies, and that you get more subtle energy is, the sensitivity, as he called it. Something of this language, and then, but beyond that was the consciousness, and then the creativity. And so somewhat time did he go through the various classical known mystical literature and pointing this out, the differences of it. But the thing about the sensitive one, I was thinking just now about another application, not really mystical, but also in these extreme sports and so on, mountain climbers and so on. It's come up, this incredible feat which people are doing and pursuing some kind of intensity. But the question raised, if you wonder, is that, incapable of doing what amazing feats that they do, amazing control of the body, we're also facing extreme fear and the rest of all of that, all the psychology of it. But is there still something in the middle of it? Can it be that this way of exposure, which is, an engagement, some kind of engagement in the physical world, can do something which, in another description or by other people, it's described as something coming entirely from within. And this is, I'll give you an example about this, or kind of another way, because this is all I'm exploring with you, Josh, and you've been great, is that we're exploring all these different ways of talking about it. That's all we're doing, these different ways of, God knows what the truth is. But this, I said, I remember a conversation with him years and years ago, I was hanging around, and I was lucky at times just having these informal chats with him. He was at the time very upset about how leaders in certain groups he knew of, particularly in America, were conducting themselves. And he said they got obsessed with this wrong idea of giving people conscious shocks.
Yeah.
And he said effectively they were being abused. But then what happened, the people, the students there, became used to this, regarded it was only when they were being abused that they were working. And they thought they're working, suddenly, given all these shocks, and this was the way it worked. And Bennett was absolutely furious about this. He said this imposition on people from outside is spoilt something which should come from within them. Because he was always saying, to put it, I was literally saying, you should rely on waking up on God and not on somebody else's ego.
Yeah.
The master.
I just remember like what you're saying there. I remember reading in, again, a great book of his that I found very useful, like Talks on Beelzebub's Tales, where he kind of goes into a bit of his sort of interpretation of the, the Gorna Ho Ha Hark.
Oh, that's that part. That was, and the Tremors of Comno.
Yeah, and it seems to, Bennett almost seems to suggest that, that sort of his Gorna Ho Ha Hark's apparatus, the lab and all that, is kind of like, the priory, and the methods that Gurdjieff was using at the time by kind of like you're saying, almost acting upon people, producing shocks in them.
Yeah, it's a sort of short circuit. That's a very good word.
Yeah. But it also brings to my mind the question then that if that's the case, that it isn't, it's nothing to do with getting kind of like shocks from the teacher. Then it does raise the question of how how people can work together. Like, it does seem that a teacher, so to speak, is needed, or at least somebody needs to take that role. But
now you're asking the hard questions.
Well, I'm just pondering. It's just coming to mind. I think, well, how can we as people, let's say then in the work, then how can we work together? How can we have a way of working together that doesn't just lead to this that kind of reliance upon the teacher, or this sense of getting.
No. I see. One strong thing for me, I think it's the most important, justification for groups is, well, one of the most important ones is this extremely hard work of appreciating that one is no different from other people. This is an extremely hard lesson. It's one of the ultimate, you see. We're all in the same boat. Then it went on and on about this, and people want, you see, I think Gurdjieff put it extremely, of course, learn to bear the unpleasant manifestations of others, but it makes it, I think, emphasizes the kind of misery of it too much. It's just, in fact, this reality of the difference between us is to come to the point of what is it to be human, and it's existential. It's not to do, you realize it's not to do with your sex, your age, your experience, or cleverness, or strength, or anything like this. Bennett kept on saying, we're all in the same boat. And that's hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just thinking about no one wants to be, no one wants to be in the same boat as, the person they see to be as a.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't want to be. I mean, that's bound to happen. That seems to happen when people, groups come together. I might have my impression, obviously, my immediate impressions of the people in the room, and think, oh well, that he's an idiot, whatever, all that can be going on.
Exactly right.
So that's just a separation, isn't it? A segregation of myself from the others, and but that seems to be based on the assumption that I know myself already. Like, obviously, there's that injunction, know thyself.
Yeah.
And that seems to be something like, in one sense, something considered high and mighty. Like, always sort of know yourself. It's going to be some big, big thing to work towards. So people kind of accept that as a future goal. But we always seem to be operating from the assumption that we know ourselves. Like, if I ask you who you are, you'll probably give me some kind of answer. Well, I'm Josh Denny, and then if I come from this parents, blah 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 blah.
That's right. Yeah.
And then if you ask me what kind of a person are you, I'll say, well, I'll have some ideas about maybe I'm generous, or maybe I'm self. So I already have all these ideas about who I am. And that seems to be like almost the kind of antithesis of what you're saying of recognizing that we're all in the same boat. And what does that mean? Because that has to put aside, those apparent differences, or what I take to be as what I already know of myself. I like the idea of, like, realizing that you don't absolutely have no idea who you are.
Bravo. Welcome to the club. It's like you put it like so well. My take now is on the side of saying that, for me, the general tenor of the literature tends to concentrate very much on the isolated individual.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I had trouble with it, very seemingly innocuous terminology, some of the exercises they talk about. The master, it's a term taken from Gurdjieff's own period of In Search of the Miraculous. But you see, the contrary is all still, it is what I call this almost archaic epochs, or Bennett called it a megalanthropic epoch, which is, developed the idea of the individual genius and all that sort of thing. And that was carrying on. It's a lot in Gurdjieff, which is carry on from the 19th century. Is kind of his science, his 19th century science, it's not 20th century science and so on.
Yeah.
But it's very little appreciated about the, in fact, because you think about Josh, who are you? And you think, oh, I'm Josh, and you look inside yourself, you see, but you can look inside yourself as kind of like a separate entity. You don't see how you contextualize we are. Now, you gave me a picture just now when we talked about the teacher and all the rest of it, and many things fused together. Well, let's imagine a group in which the role of the, let's call it the leader of the group, whatever it is to enable people to be together and talk together and exchange experiences. Now, Bennett pointed to this, but he never pointed out. He always said, he said, because you get in the situation of, say, being an elder and students and whatever the structure, social structure is. He said, you will always be advisable, never take the active role, he said towards the leader. Now, most people in charge of groups become the active role. They push, they direct, and so on. He said, the intelligent one takes the reconciling role.
Yeah.
And that is a true enablement, enablement of other people. And there's very subtle things he was pointed to, and he felt very strongly because he had great power, direction, and so on, but he had this sensitivity towards this enablement. And I still think I was lucky being with him because you could argue with him, you could talk with him. He wasn't on a podium dictating anything and this kind of thing. So I think there's implicit, and I just wanted to throw this in, some kind of appreciation of groups in a different way than before, because not like, one can always say, Gurdjieff's laid it down. You got to have somebody who knows more, and then because they learned it from somebody who knew more, and then they pass it on to these other people, and so it goes on this chain. So what this set up was all this rule of what I call the golden odies. The people who've been with Gurdjieff as the second order authorities, it's like first order, he was the son absolute, and the second order sons, and they all went and did their things, you see. But it's all involutionary. It had no scope, you see, for what's being forced upon people now. The golden odies are all dead, see? And it's like coming to one of my hackneyed phrases I use very well, which is taken from a song, an American song, you suddenly look around and say, well, there's nobody here but us chickens.
But yeah, I mean, I totally see what you're saying. Like in a lot of the language, that Gurdjieff used and stuff, like you mentioned master. There does seem to be that kind of, like you're saying, then okay, then a more ancient viewpoint, like you could say, of the world, like just in the way that the views of science have developed. You could say he's using an old sort of scientific outlook. So that I appreciate that in the language there is that there, but on the other hand, to me, I kind of see him then Gurdjieff, or whatever he was part of, as more trying to bring or emphasize more what you're talking about as this modern, the kind of views that are more implied in modern science, where there's less like this sense of there's a thing here and a thing, a thing here, that kind of view, more about like quantum and, more about, because I kind of look at him as, Gurdjieff then as like, the end of that sort of age, like the idea, him as being the ending of it's supposed to be the ending of the age of the good,
wow,
the lineage and all that kind of thing, but as you're saying, that seems to be an entrenched idea, then in the foundations, and then obviously there's something to that, like if you looked at any practical sphere of action, like like joinery, then yeah, you do tend to seem to have to learn it from someone who you know, who knows?
That's right. And just to try to, it's full of my Bennett's language. This is true in the world of function.
Yeah.
You know, you had to build a machine more or less. You've got to, that's how it belongs to. It's not appropriate for the world of being and will, but you get it projected from that world of function onto these more subtle worlds, and then something is misunderstood.
Yeah.
And like being, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. I'm so sorry. You know, I did. It's a lovely flow we got. You know, just figure. So again, recently I bet it had understood this about this realm of being, which is so important for him, but not as important as well. He said, how do we go engage with this? Is through participation. So in the world of function, we manipulate things. In the world of being, we participate in things. So we're not separate from them doing anything. You just participate. And I'm very keen on this idea of participation and how possibly something went a little bit askew in the early descriptions of a fundamental of the fourth way, which was self-observation, because it was treated like observation. Now, observation belongs to the world of function, but this participation belongs to the world of being, and there's two different kinds of values of consciousness. See, you only see in the world of participation by joining in. You see, you only observe in the world of function by separating out. They're quite different in mode, you see. So you get in the world of function, you get this caricature or archetype of the man in the white coat, the completely impersonal, cold-blooded observer who just with his clipboard noting things down. That's the kind of observer consciousness. Yeah. But the participative consciousness, you're joining in with the dance.
Yeah.
And this was, I'll just add a little plug to another little plug there. This is one of the critical dilemmas for the people who built Biosphere 2, because they were practicing participative science, whereas all the people around the critics were in the old worldview of this functional science of being, to do science, you had to be separated from what you were studying. And they said, this is nonsense. We have to be part of it. And so that was the real dilemma. So it's there in the world of science as well as in the work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, like you say, many. I think a lot of people, then, you know, whoever they are, take the work in that sort of functional, you know, the world of function approach, because that seems to be like, you know, the peak of the idea of I, then a real I. It's this completely
right,
separate, that could just, you know, completely removed from everything, that could like somehow watch everything. I don't know, objectively, and not be affected from it. But where's this kind of like being and participation? I don't think there's the same kind of sense of like yourself as the center. You know, if you're talking about participation, people might still think, okay, I'm here, and this is all happening around me, and I'm participating in it. And that might be like a functional approach to participation. Whereas, you know, I think what you're talking about as being and real participation, there can't be that same sense of a kind of yourself as a center, you know?
That's really good. Yes, absolutely.
But I just wanted to say on lineage, like, there seems to be in the work, you know, this big thing about lineage and that. And again, that seems to be almost the antithesis for my take on the work, where it seems to suggest that there is no, you know, there is no lineage in the normal sense of the word. Like, I would say, like, the real lineage of the fourth way is, it's emergent. You know what I mean? It emerges in people. It's not something that's just given. I don't, you know, like, oh, I can give you, here's your lineage.
Here it is, you know, I got my
I think
provenance.
I think that's the opposite. I mean, I think, and again, like, if you look up to meetings with remarkable men, it's just it's people's, I could say, their being then, and also their actions. That's like, to me, where lineage comes from. Like, the idea of the fourth way is that it could come from it could spring up anywhere. You know, Mr. Joe the grocer down the road could suddenly have you know, some insight or something like that, and could start something. It doesn't have to look like a school and this and blah blah blah, but it's just like you're saying, a kind of action, like what Bennett's talking about, this perfection of doing. It doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to look like the movements or, you know.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's many thousands of associations that became one again, because one source that Bender was very keen on and drew on a lot was the rule of Saint Benedict, you know, the Benedictine order of monks and so on. And this rule is very interesting. It's noted in there about guidance and so on, the role of the abbot, the leader, and so on. It was very specifically written down by Benedict that they should be open to what was said by anybody, even the youngest novice, you see, because they knew the Holy Ghost speaks to anyone, you know, as it's written in practice. Of course, everything's cursed by authoritarianism, but that was a feeling towards the right thing. And I even got a picture of, because, you know, just a person might become a very valuable guru for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Anybody could take the mantle and do something of work.
Yeah. And that's very hard for people then to relinquish it, because you get into that state and that position, and then to let it go is not so easy. And efforts in most social structures and psychologies have become directed towards preserving what was. It's like institutions end up spending most of their energy just preserving their own existence and not doing the job for which they were set up.
Yeah.
A leader just uses everything to justify his position, not doing the job. And as we see in certain obvious cases. Yeah. But this is great. You've got openness to this emergence, and so it's even a basic thing about this portrayal of schools. It says they arise when there is a need, and then they should close when it's over. And of course, we know the foundation and so on. It's just an example of doing exactly the wrong thing. Is in terms of completely devotion to self-preservation and propagation of itself. But that was, and you see, I often in my mind, and I say, look around, it might come from anywhere. I feel that Bennett instinctively, Bennett was very much a man between the old and the new. He was sort of extreme on both ends, so to speak. He was really right in that watershed, as it's called, between them. He's very intuitively aware of new trends, but also very much steeped in old ideas. And it was this feeling that he might, how to say it, when he, he's accused of his eclecticism, he went wandering off to Subud, to Idris Shah, Shirpuri Baba, Hassan Shushud. And said, well, can't he make up his mind? But no, because he was aware. And he was really, he took the whole bit between his teeth. He said he went into it. He just went into it. Didn't kind of hedge his bets or whatever. He just went into it. Like with Subud, he took the enormous risk of declaring Bach Subud as a messenger, as equivalent to Ashya to Shimash and all the rest of it, and for that he was pilloried and so on. But he just threw himself into it, right? Because he knew that it's like expect the unexpected. The real work will come from unexpected places, not from expected places.
Yeah, and it almost seems like as well seems as a kind of a spirit of like confidence. I don't know if that's the right word, but like you'd have to people are maybe operating from this kind of fear, like, oh, I can't have to stay in this thing. I can't just go off and look at this and explore that. I have to hold on to what I what I currently see as valuable. Whereas, like you said, there needs to be, but there can be that attitude of not grasping and being willing to let go of everything, because there is an attitude of confidence, like say confidence in the work, not confidence in yourself, but yeah, like you say, confidence that it can that you're not going to be like locked into some kind of irredeemable, like, oh no, I went to Cebu, no, I'm done for now,
Yeah.
No return.
That was exactly something which you picked it up from there. Bennett said about certainty. And Gurdjieff, he said, even Gurdjieff said wasn't certain, but he said he had confidence. He could make a mistake, but then he could, redeem it. He didn't have to be certain to know in advance, what should work and shouldn't work. He just did stuff, but he had the confidence, whatever way it came up, he would do something more and resolve or improve or make use of whatever happened. And that was, he made this point between certainty and confidence. And most, as you were suggesting, most people look for certainty. Before I make a step, I want the guarantee there's the right thing to do, and I will have a good position in it, and I will get the results I want, and I won't be upset in any way. The snowflake attitude, as it's called now, the nimby-pamby, weak, pathetic, unrealistic, unintelligent approach.
Yeah, looking for certainty. Again, it seems to be that connected with that old, like you said, that more sort of a previous epoch sort of outlook, isn't it?
It is.
Again, like I was reading a bit of the Dramatic Universe today. And like, he says, doesn't he, in his kind of introduction to that about our search for absolutes, and I think like a lot of us in this, spiritual world are still, like you say, operating from that kind of,
I must say, interrupt you again, it struck me very strongly, to say to you, it looked like very suspicious certain strata of the Gurdjieff work and so on, starting like this, the tendency towards being right-wing and authoritarian, and you get this attachment towards ancient wisdom and so on. It all smacks of this saying, oh, there were these, are or were these authorities who knew the will of God, whatever it was. And we've got to find this, and all meaning comes from top down, from the smart guys in heaven, dictating what should be. And there's that attitude. That's why I call it right-wing and authoritarian. And it's a very
I think I lost you there for a second, Tony. But
okay, we're doing to see. Well, the right wing tends to be authoritarian in terms of law, and so you have to have special people in charge. You see. And there's, those who can guarantee, and leaders and this kind of thing. And if you don't have that, then you have what's called a free for all, anybody can come up. But you've got to think back to the history of this. I'm just jumping again, how a lot of people tried to stop the Bible being published in English because it would enable people to think for themselves.
They didn't have to have someone to read it to them then,
Well, not only read it, but to interpret it. And so people couldn't have it in their own hands. This was so resisted, you see. And there's always this sort of thing of being resisted. Don't give power to the people, ever, because you can't trust the idiots, they're unworthy idiots. It's only us special people who can do it. That's that whole thing I see in whole echelons of the fourth way, and it is reflecting an ability to get with this. I use the phrase "get with" or to get attuned to or enter this new kind of epoch, and one wonders what how Bennett will be describing his idea, his vision, his belief or conjecture about the present new epoch, the synergic epoch. But it's very close to this moving away from a non-hierarchical view. Moving away from a hierarchical view into a non-hierarchical view. And he was always searching for ways to feel this and articulate it, because it's a very important question of language. You've got to have the language for these things, because the language gives you the ability to think about these things. And if you don't have the language, you can't think about them. You can't, and also you can't relate to them. You can't ask the right questions. All this comes from the language. So I myself am very interested in, Eric Davis, you mentioned, is earlier, and before we set up this conversation, people like that who are very much in the contemporary world with its own hang-ups and whatever it is, but it's all very related to an emergent view of things and to a, again, you to really have the language is the, it's being developed by one of his components, some scientists such as, what was her name, Susan something or other, who is renowned as the scientist who revealed the communication of trees.
Right.
How trees communicate and so on. And there was a time also when I believe she was vilified for all of this and mocked, because this whole idea that trees could communicate was here, because there's the old view, you see, only humans can communicate. Only humans have, will and so on. And this is the old view. But you get a new view, then everything is alive and sentient. And there was this wonderful philosopher and psychologist, 19th century, Gustav Fechner. He talked about day view versus night view, had this glowing vision. And a lot of people know about him these days, and his vision of the whole earth as a kind of intelligent totality, and all this sort of ways of thinking about it. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I've just got off on saying a language, if you can't speak certain things, you can't know them. People imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I was...
Can I just complete this? Imagine they say, oh, I know what I mean, but I can't put it into words. And I say, you don't know what you mean.
Yeah, just like you're saying, the importance of being able to articulate. I mean, I think most of us have some insight into that, perhaps when, we can have some kind of, I suppose, like dreams would be a classic one. Like maybe you have a dream, you wake up and you can't, you've had a dream and there's something and you're trying to recall it. But
that's a great example.
So that's like trying to get it back. So there's the same kind of sensation to me then in kind of trying to articulate. But I do appreciate that, like, to the extent you could say that I can't articulate it, you don't kind of understand it, or that in the articulating of it, that's the development of understanding is for us is kind
of that's it. You see, suddenly a whole flood of associations. You first of all reference to a book, maybe we look into one of those book by sort of Matteo Blanco. He talks about the dream world and so on as a world of infinite cess. It sounds a very strange idea, but in how he's trying to say it's quite different logic and why it's difficult. But then what I flashed on to, bang, 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 there's this, because reference offers to things being objective, and he had the objective language. Now, it's come back to really to almost the starting point, what I hoped for in a conversation. And because you left with him, he was always very smart, he kept on saying, well, say there was an objective language, lost it, then there will be an objective language, and then people have to develop the objective language, but there is a residue related to my beliefs or descriptions of a lot of Gurdjieff people being reactionary and right-wing and so on, that you're like, somewhere there is this system worked out, which is the right system. You see, we got to get with it. So our early conversations about the terminology used and the descriptions and so on, and we've become familiar and even hackneyed coming out with terms, like waking up and self-observation, whatever they are. But you don't really know them. Now the idea is what's going on now. This is why I personally am interested in beginning to make contact, even my late age, with, because I've been shy about it before, with people in the general culture, is having these conversations. I think it comes out of conversation. It's just by talking together we can develop a way of talking, you see. And it's different from the old idea, where you're older, you have these special people who sit in their armchair and have these special ideas, which they then pour out on the world. And now we're in a different system where it's like Timothy O'Leary, I think, said one time brilliantly, philosophy is a team sport. And which is contrary to the old view, which is very philosophy is for the isolated super being. You see, but a team sport, it's lovely, you know.
Like the man in the cave, you know.
Yeah, it's a man in the cave, you know, or the austerely on the top of a mountain, whatever he is, you know, and meditating, you know, all that, this kind of images, you see what it is. But there's something, as you say, you've got the right term. This is the code word for all this sort of thing. When I just wave my hand, you know, I say all this sort of thing. I don't really know what all this sort of thing is because we've got to develop it. Got to find ways of talking, and it's going to be, is it relevant? We've got virtual reality and all this stuff going on now. Is it significant that more and more energy is put into the contribution of art to science, which would have been unthought of before? There's now more and more, you know, creativity is being brought in. They say, well, this is just coloring book, you know, making it look nice and interesting. And then you see, is it going to change people's thinking? That's why I want to add again to my friends who built the biosphere too. They're rebels and anarchists in some ways, but they have this sense you've got to, as they said, you have to feel it. You don't just think it and describe it, you have to feel it. You know, how do we get into this world? And so then, in order to feel it, you've got to do something, create something. And so I think the way of art is a major contribution in here. No matter how puerile we think these results may be, there's something, you know, it's like the, let's call it here's a Velasquez term, the noosphere, you know, which is, you know, inherent in the biosphere is sort of coming out, seeking expression, because it has, you talked about knowing, maybe the biosphere has to know itself. And that's why it's produced us as a contributor. But now you become more and more separated from the natural world. And now we have to find a way to re-enter that natural world and, like Eliot said, and know it for the first time. Because we have to bring our sophisticated and artificial constructs to utility back into being a brother of other life forms, of being a member of the family and not just an upstart lunatic.
But yeah, what you're saying about like kind of like re-entry, you know, like it suggests that we've almost been like mankind has kind of gone through a period of relative separation, and then there's this kind of re-entry, you know, maybe what we're experiencing the first sort of movement of this re-entry back into, say, the natural world. And it, you know, what you're saying flashed up, you know, ideas of Rudolf Steiner about how like man's consciousness is sort of segregated in order to develop certain capacities and then re-enter. And again, like with language, you know, the whole thing about Babel, like the idea that there was this unified language, and then we had to split off, and the split off enabled kind of like, could say, specialization, or, you know, it enabled a kind of a concentration of activity, which you know, enabled certain things to be achieved. But then we're kind of now again back in the moment of time where those separate sort of languages or you know, groups of people have to come back together, bring in the fruits of their labors, and we have to come to some kind of way of dealing with what people have found out, you know, if you like, through their different endeavors. But yeah, I really like this idea that again, it's just come to me from reading the Dramatic Universe, about this language. You know, Bennett talks about different kinds of language, and like, you know, signs and symbols and gestures. And it, you know, the impressions that are invoked in me from what he's talking about is that it seems to be that there's this you know, part of man's purpose then, or his endeavors, there's this endeavor to create a kind of language, you know, a new language, to create a new world. But again, from the impressions that I get from reading this stuff, the kind of, it seems to require a very significant and kind of you know, intense sort of discipline from the person to well, not just individual people, then from groups of people, but to be able to create a kind of a real language, you know?
Yes, I was wondering whether what you just said is like a return to, you know, this reality, and I'm just pondering it now, you know, because we still need these modes of concentration, which historically we've tended to always it was kind of developed in the Renaissance, and essentially we call the genius, the special person, and so on. That there must always be that, but that's, I just don't know. I'm holding this in question these days. Could you think it seems so wishy-washy, so weak, you know, just these say like our conversation, all kinds of conversation. How could something come out of that which can take hold, which can make a difference? And when we, and I still say I'm part of the we, carry with us this thing, we've got to have something strong and clear coming from a center, which can go out into the world, you see. All that which I'm admitting I still find residually in me about some special thing which is going to solve things or change things. But a part of me is also saying, hang on, you know, just this seemingly inchoate kind of interaction going on. Maybe the only way, because if you have anybody anywhere in the world now coming up with anything like, I've got the truth, I've got the answer. I mean, one thing for sure, I'm going to run away from them as fast as I can.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, almost certainly they're going to cause more fuck up than before, whatever it was.
Yeah.
You know, it's
yeah,
just.
I just like.
Please
I like
go on.
I like this idea of just that part of what's going to maybe, you know, again, use the language of ushering a new world, then, or just check some kind of change is the creation of and what I mean, I just mean like, I mean, the creation of a kind of a new language is something that's an endeavor that people are engaged of, but that doesn't have to be looked at, like you're saying, as just as isolated people engaged in this practice of their own, but maybe it's something like you're saying that's you know, that's coordinated at a larger level. But I just love this idea of you know, looking at Bennett's work of what it means to like I said, and create or discover like objective language. And you know, he kind of links gesture with will, and it reminded me when he was talking about that of you know, he says that through the will we can kind of, people can come together and link in a different you know, can be unified in a different way than, like say, than through being and through function.
You know, he principle came to mind. You know, how do you develop consciousness? The answer is through consciousness. The old alchemy. How do you make gold? Through gold.
Yeah.
There's something too in this about, you know, like people say, well, I'm doing all kinds of dreadful things in order to, say, get across a message because it's the right message, you see. But of course, the way they're doing it, getting across the message, destroys the message. So there's something in this which can happen and grow because nearly most of the population don't recognize its significance, which I think is some emergent something. As if it's kind of noticed in a populist way, then it will be blocked and destroyed. I was very struck by, you heard of Doris Lessing, incredible woman, a novelist and so on. One of her great books, I only read it once, but it made such an impact on me, The Four-Gated City, which was partly science fiction. She wrote it in the 50s, and it went into the 90s, and they had this community, which was really had something about it, some energy and so on. And she's got how the media got attracted to it and made documentaries, and they were asking media people in all kindness, was asking, well, what were their ideas, what was guiding what they were doing. And of course, then the people started thinking about this, where did it all come from? And within a year, the whole thing disintegrated.
Yeah. Well, that pattern seems to be kind of common, doesn't it? In different levels, and it's been talked about in different ways. Like, a game like Solomon and things like that. People kind of then believing, or like you're saying, then thinking about it, and that destroying it.
Yeah,
But there seems to be something like. I would just say there seems to be like you're saying, this thing of it coming out into the populace, and kind of coming out into the open, and that, kind of being the death knell for it. And yet there's also seems to be this need for like some kind of for concrete, like you're saying with her, then they were in a group, and they were doing what they're doing, and it was concrete, and there needs to be some interaction with the I don't know, then the local populace, like when Bennett was talking about his communities and things, and the ideas of schools, and like different rungs of society, or different roles, that for a school to kind of function properly, it had to serve some actual role, beneficial role in the community, like and again with the idea with the monks and stuff, they might grow food that they maybe give to the local populace. But I'm just thinking of like then how the spiritual world, and connecting that with will, has a kind of a very concrete material basis or an expression. And I'm thinking here in terms of like in terms of Christianity, like the actual physical building of a church or something being very close to, like, say, the Holy Spirit. You know what I mean? I'm saying that that kind of spiritual actual action involves or relies upon something that's very kind of concrete or physical in nature, whereas we might think of it as something, I don't know, spiritual as airy, like you're saying, as very airy fairy, or immaterial.
All right, so let's see this aspect of manifestation. Something has to be actually there. I'm sure that's very convincing and right. The kind of thread I'm picking up now is taking, wandering again, off piece, so to speak, into the sense of there's one very evident thing for me is, as I talk about consciousness, is how inept and stupid most of it is. And because it's what you find, because it's a topic these days in science, can science explain consciousness and so on. There's nearly always I get the impression, everybody's talking about it, everyone talking about it imagines they know what it is. That they understand it, they say, yeah, we just, here it is, we're trying to explain it. And I think, oh no, this has got it wrong right from the start. You just don't get it, Now, there were a few prescient people, like one of my heroes, William James, the extraordinary American, lived at the beginning of the 20th century or the end of the 19th century. And he really was keenly aware there are different kinds. There's a variety of consciousness in consciousness. It's not monolithic. It's not all of the same kind. It's not one dollop and so on. And again, it's quite in contrast to the ordinary layman's view, you know, either you're awake or you're not awake, it's this and or, you know, just this, you know, everybody knows what it is. And no, we haven't begun. Because, why? Because imagine this extraordinary thing proposed with through various means, including Gurdjieff and so on, so raising this question of consciousness, but not right to connect with what the way you're speaking earlier on in the beginning of a conversation. This is, and indeed, better put it in explicit terms, in this special terminology, of course, we cannot know consciousness because it's a matter of being, you see. But then let's leave it simply as, you know, this most incredible, most intimate thing, say, about us. We don't know. It's the old image of the fish in water. Is the fish really aware of water? It's like us. We swim in consciousness and so on. And so, and when I talk about variety of consciousness and so on, I'm having in mind, or coming into my mind, about this change, which is, I gave once a kind of weird little title once, ontological socialism. It means that all living beings are of equal status.
Yeah.
Instead of the hierarchical view which dominates from the earlier centuries. Yeah. And so it means that it's not that, say, animals and so on have a weaker or inferior form of our kind of consciousness. It's just they have their kind of consciousness, you see. And the tree has its kind of consciousness. And this sort of way of talking harks back to ancient times, to spirit cultures and so on. But it is resurfacing again because we really don't know. And I would have thought that, you know, what I find, well, personally speaking, I have to say this at this juncture, Rosh, is that when I'm doing what I call sitting or, you know, doing a morning exercise or something like this, most of the time I'm like grappling in the unknown. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I am. I don't know what it means. It just, you know, left like the standard exercise I do, I share with other people, but it's just like, it is really just getting used to just facing the unknown. And then I think this unknown is consciousness. It's the real consciousness. And it's not being emphasized. And again, you pointed it out so clearly all the time, this confusion. You have an intense experience. I'm more conscious. No, you're not. You can always say, Bennett had this very clearly in his scientific background about energies. He said there's 3 dimensions of energies. One is quantity, how much energy. 2 is intensity. You know, at what degree, like how hot is it in terms of temperature? You could have how much in quantity of heat, how intense in terms of temperature. But then the third way is introduced, which is quality. And what we're into this question of consciousness is quality. Now, few people have tried to keep with the side of consciousness, like the Zen and the art of motorbike maintenance. You went on and on about quality, and people have kind of tried to get the sense of it, this discrimination of quality. But it is the most important discrimination. And it's precisely, I think you illustrated earlier on, you must not confuse intensity with quality.
Yeah.
And quality, it can be, I say, very quiet, almost ordinary. It's the light touch. I search for metaphors, you know, okay? So, usually this is what invoking can us, you know, practically, experientially, existentially deal with all of this. And where we get searching towards this particular kind of conflict on passes you, because I'm full of, you know, Bennett's scheme, which he outlines in Deeper Man and Function Being Will, the 3 worlds, the four worlds sometimes, and the seven worlds, and all this kind of thing. And I think, well, this is like it's a kind of issue. I actually personally argued with him years back in another kind of context. It's like you're still delivering from on high these schemas, but it can become so disassociated from you and I in our ordinary lives, waking up, whatever. And now I don't have the words. Waking up is hackneyed now. You know what I mean? Just seeing the wood for the trees. I mean, it's more like it. I mean, seeing the wood for the trees. We know about. We got all this. We got all the material we need. We don't get it. What is it we're not getting? You know. And every time you begin to get it, there's some kind of nuclear explosion in the depths of the noosphere. We may not actually feel it.
But it's like you know, like you're saying, we know all this you know, this stuff then, but we don't understand it. So like it's like,
yes,
you know, we have access to it in our day-to-day, you know, unextraordinary experience. It's all like it's here, but we you know, we don't understand what we know. And so there seems to be the requirement for like some of these kind of like, you know, artificial teachings and forms of expression to help to guide us back to, you know, to what is already here in our present experience. So yeah, they do. It seems to be necessary for some artificiality, you know, that we have to get almost like get way off course.
yeah.
In order then to suddenly realize the reality of it back in our present experience. But what you're saying about knowledge, and that, you know, like, you know, you can't know consciousness, because, like, you know, consciousness, if we say in Bennett's terms, is in the sort of realm of being, then that's not, you know, it's not the realm of function. But that to anybody I've talked about, that that's an anathema, like,
isn't it? Yeah, they say what?
Because to me that we're approaching it from the aspect of knowledge, you know, of a function, and assuming that consciousness then, well, that can be known for a start, you know, or is known.
Exactly.
When I came across again, it's only fairly recently that I, like, you know, read Deeper Man and you know, and the Dramatic Universe. But that was a big it was like what we were talking about at the start. On one hand, it was like a great excitement, like, wow, this is you know, opens a whole new reality. But on the other hand, it's like, well, oh my God, you know, if it can't be known, what kind of, you know, then I have to let go all my attachments.
Exactly.
That way of doing things.
It's all about unlearning.
Yeah.
As they say, which is a common enough thing to say. You have, well, we're probably coming towards the end of what we can.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention on objective language that I think people have the idea, and again, you know, they probably get it from Gurdjieff, that you know, objective language means what? I think to them that the idea of objective language means using the correct term, you know, for the correct thing. So I think that's what they, you know, what they take objective language just mean, like, oh, I learn this term, I learn the meaning of it, and I just have to believe that this is the objective language because this is what Gurdjieff said.
Right, because that's what he said.
Yeah. Whereas I get the sense that the objective language is again almost the complete opposite. It's not like a shared subscription to a set of terms, and then the assumption that we're all using them the same way. To me, objective language is getting into this kind of like what we're talking about, articulation, into this you know, into this kind of action or realm of giving voice. It doesn't have to be like considered objective as, like, you know, from outside in the normal kind of scientific
I think
you know.
so. I think so. Yeah. This is might be that flashing, you know, just in my brain, there will be multiple kind of associations. When people gather, well, if they gather in sincere conversation, they develop an objective language for the present moment of that conversation. Then it can't, that's it, it's within that present moment, you know, and it's only within a present moment. That can't be generalized outside of that. So there was I just remember some man, it was a man, I think his name was Wilkins, in the 17th century, at the beginnings of the Royal Society in London, you know, which was the first institution devoted to science ever, you know, kind of thing. He was actually very keen on having an objective language in science, and people like Leibniz tried to do it. But there was an Italian writer about this, and I can't remember his name now, but he explores all these attempts at, in history, known, you know, finding objective language, and he uncovers how there is an inner contradiction within the whole idea. And you say it's simply the way in which people look at it. It's just you've been describing just the way, which means it's a folly. And it won't happen like that. So, yes, you're right to bring us towards this at the end. You know, it does confront you with, it's a dilemma. You build up all these wonderful things. You imagine, you know, all the wealth of imagery and stuff in Beelzebub's tales, and you can stuff yourself with all of this, and all there's thousands of books now about Gurdjieff and his doings and his associates and whatever it was. And but you know, there's a kind of crux inside it somewhere about relinquishing, about sacrifice. And Bennett was very hot on this, you know, on the theme of sacrifice, which is also very unpopular. People just want to add on to what they've got and have more of it. That's what to give things up is just anathema, you know, kind of thing. It's like, but the thing is to give up illusions. So why Gurdjieff emphasized it was Beelzebub was to destroy mercilessly ideas built up over many generations, and marginally successful at this. So that was the point, disillusionment. And again, the reason why the fourth way is not popular, because it's founded really, I think, substantially on disillusionment, not on feeding one's fantasies and all of that. So there's some mystery here. And I don't want to go on too much and spoil things. This has been, for me, a very fulsome thing, and it's very, we haven't got anywhere in the sense, we haven't resolved anything, you see, but we just, I want to, you know, I'll even perhaps even put on YouTube, you know, just to annoy people, if nothing else.
Well, that's as good a reason as any.
Isn't it? It's been marvelous. So give my love to